What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show here. It is Thursday, February 7th, 2019. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. And something just went wrong on our link here, I think. All right, welcome to our show. It's Thursday, February 7th, 2019. And we've got a lot to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and observations. So let's get right on into it here. People, of course, are still talking about Trump's State of the Union address. And a lot of people are saying it sounded really good, but in the end, there were a lot of mixed messages, especially about foreign policy. And his talk about ending all these foreign interventions were directly contradicted by his obvious threats against Iran and Venezuela. Trump praised U.S. troops serving in Afghanistan and Syria as having fought with valor, but he gave little indication for a timeline for the pullout from the region, despite his previous statements. And that did not sit well with a lot of people. Pardon me. Michael Maloof, who's a former Pentagon official, told Russia Today, Trump's failure to provide specifics about a withdrawal timeline was disappointing, especially because the president had earlier indicated that troops would be returning home in the near future. Well, that also turned out to be a little bit less than accurate. Now Trump is saying he's simply going to relocate them from Syria to Iraq to keep watch on Iran, because those gosh darn Iranians, we know they're up to no good. Anyway, so getting on over to the House of Representatives. Now that the Democrats are in charge, they are uncorking on the White House. They're just going to swamp Trump and the White House with investigations. And this is coming even as the Mueller investigation into Trump-Russia collusion is winding down, having found nothing. But apparently Scott Meisler is departing Mueller's team, but he may be tooling up for something else. Now, over the past 2 weeks, Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker and Senator Chuck Grassley have indicated that a final report will be coming soon. So enter Adam Schiff, who is the new chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who's been staffing up with lawyers and investigators, and they want to reopen the Russiagate investigation. And they want to take another look at Trump's finances, even though the previous investigation ended without finding anything at all. This is basically carrying out lawfare. And I hate to be blunt about it, but this is what Trump gets for not cleaning up the election system and not dealing with the illegal immigrant voters. So he's hoisted with his own petard on this one here. So federal prosecutors have subpoenaed a venture capitalist, Imad Zuberi, and he's a longtime Democratic donor to Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. But after Trump won in 2016, he gave more than $1 million to Donald Trump's inauguration committee. Now, he is saying it was just an opportunity for networking, a chance to meet people that would be good to know face to face. But his contribution put him under the lens of federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York. He and his Avenue Ventures company are the only donors listed by name in investigator subpoena of records from the Trump inaugural committee. Now, Zuberi is an American, and he's saying this was just a networking thing so that he could meet people who would help him with the New York Real Estate Investment Fund. But the House is just going to, the House is going to spend the next 2 years investigating Trump, and then they're going to campaign in 2020 saying, look at all these investigations. There has to be something there. You know, there's a lot of smoke. Somewhere there's fire. We didn't find it, but trust us, there is. This is as dirty as politics get here. We are seeing a lot of calls from a lot of different venues that Elizabeth Warren should resign and certainly step down from running in 2020 over this whole Native American fraud that she pulled on everybody, including her law school. And the Washington Post published her Texas bar registration card, where she described her racial identity as Indian. And she used that to advance her career. She got advantages by claiming to be a minority woman of color. And that makes her a liar. And it's no surprise to see politicians who are liars, but a lot of people are saying she's been caught and she ought to step down. All right, we're going to do a shout out to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And apparently down in Virginia, boy, they're having a rough time. So far, you've got the Virginia governor, Ralph Northam, Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, and Attorney General Mark Herring have all been caught up in scandals involving racist pasts and accusations of sexual assault, all within a month. All three are Democrats. And now ABC is reporting Democratic Representative Bobby Scott has allegedly known about the allegations of sexual assault against Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax for at least a year and did nothing about it. Apparently, he was told about the incident directly from the alleged victim, Dr. Vanessa Tyson. Now, Tyson yesterday released a detailed statement about the alleged 2004 assault, which took place at the Democratic National Convention in Boston. These conventions, I guess, can get to be wild, wild parties. But again, we need to be very cautious here. People are smelling blood in the water. I don't want to see the next 2 years where it's just, the Republicans and the Democrats going back 30 and 40 years to find mud to hurl at each other. We have problems right here and now, right? Things going on today that are being ignored. In fact, to be very honest, I'm looking at this nonsense about the blackface, which has just erupted all over the place. And I feel like we're being conditized again. And for those who don't know what that means, that goes back to 2001. Early in 2001, the United States was already telling other countries they were preparing to invade Afghanistan. And it showed up in the foreign press, was in BBC, Jane's Defense, all kinds of things like that. Here in the United States, we were not told at all. Corporate media didn't mention a thing about Afghanistan. The story we were getting was all about Gary Condit and Chandra Levy, who had allegedly had a romantic affair, and then Chandra Levy disappeared, was presumed to have been killed, Gary Condit obviously being the top suspect. And it was just nonstop coverage of Gary Condit. I mean, they had aerial cameras watching him cross the street between buildings. So that when 9/11 happened, it hit the American people as a total, complete shock. And from that, we get the phrase conditizing, which is using really a minor story to not have to report on other things, like what's going on in Venezuela, what's going on in Syria, Afghanistan, and certainly with the economy. So apparently the latest one to get caught up in this blackface situation is View host Joy Behar dressing as a black woman, including makeup. And Big League Politics called ABC News for a comment on whether the Disney-owned network stands behind her, who showed her African woman costume on the air. Now, apparently Joy wore this to a Halloween party at the age of 29. And by the way, I have to say, she looked good in that picture. But this is back when she was 29. And now they're starting to go back and attack people like Jimmy Kimmel, who have done blackface as part of their skits on their TV show. And, oh my goodness, it's racist. This is racist. They're putting suspiciously too much emphasis on this. And of course, on the other side, they've got how the Democrats were dressed all in white for the State of the Union. And people are saying we haven't seen Democrats dressed all in white like this since the Republicans took their slaves away. Okay, we're going to take a phone call here. Frank in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. I recall back when I took a little bit of an interest at the time in the Chandra Levy case with Senator Gary Condit. And I remember when it happened, when it came up, her remains had been found. Sometime around then on Inside Edition, the show Inside Edition.
Yes.
I remember they were showing some video of her, hanging around the house with friends and parties and stuff, and just kind of going through a little bit about her life and everything. And I remember a statement that they said one thing that all of her friends commented on was she had always wanted to be a Mossad agent. I just thought that was curious. Mm-hmm. I didn't really know what all that meant or entailed at the time, but looking back on it, I always remember that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, again, it was a long time ago, and I seriously think that story was being used so the corporate media wouldn't have to talk about Afghanistan, because they got to fill their airtime. If they just sit there quiet, they get an FCC fine. I remember that from back when I worked at a TV station and had to work on the news. Got to keep that airtime filled, even if it's just nonsensical stuff. Anyway, Frank, thanks an awful lot for the call. We're going to let you go and switch over to Paul in Montana. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi there, Mr. Rivero. About this whole blackface thing, why am I not seeing more people in whiteface, and why am I not hearing what Dave Chappelle has to say about that? Not at all. Thank you. I'll listen to you on the air.
All right. Thanks an awful lot, Paul. And yeah, I'd be interested in what Dave Chappelle is going to say about all of this. And I mean, for Halloween costumes, people will put all kinds of things on their face, including dressing up as Native Americans. And, we've actually had the Native Americans come on out and say that, no, they're not concerned about cultural appropriation. They're not upset about sports teams using names that are iconic about that. They're just making an issue about all this blackface, and it's being used to attack people. And again, this is stuff that happened a long, long time ago, in a time when such things were not deemed to be offensive. And the reality is that I'm sure that if you look back in your own life, you will find things that you did a long time ago, which back then were considered perfectly acceptable behavior. And today, of course, would be utterly, utterly denounced. But that's really not fair to do, is it? You shouldn't be judging people by what happened in the long past when social mores were different. It's like all these people who try and denigrate Thomas Jefferson because he had slaves. Well, back then, slavery was the norm. And Thomas Jefferson was just going with the flow, so to speak. And we really don't have a right to judge people by things that happened in the past, any more than we have a right to cast judgment on things we think they might do in the future. It really is getting kind of silly. All right. Tucker Carlson was out again with another one of his great programs, and he's talking about these insane abortion laws. One that just got passed in New York, the one that died in committee in Virginia, and the one that they're getting ready to pass, apparently up in Vermont, that allow for abortions right up to the time of delivery. And Tucker Carlson took issue with the fact that Democrats and supporters of abortion are saying, well, this is about a woman's freedom. This is about, freedom. And Tucker says, why is our ruling class pushing abortion on the country? Well, because when a woman becomes a mother, she leaves the workforce, she stops being part of the tax cattle, and she doesn't have time to go to the store and spend money. It's all about feeding the big government beast and the corporations. And Tucker was absolutely right to say that. And I'm really becoming a huge, huge fan of him. Okay. Over in Michigan, you've got Rashida Tlaib, and she's a representative. And apparently, there are a lot of people who are not happy with her, even though she supposedly won her last election. But there's already a petition calling for her impeachment. It's got close to 160,000 signatures. And apparently the petition, along with saying that she hates America, hates American citizens, she's always talking about she wants to impeach Donald Trump here. But apparently during the election, she lied about living in Detroit using her father's house address. And of course, she became famous when she vowed impeach the mother blank during a party in celebration of her being sworn into Congress. So, voters regret, I guess. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Steve Elkins, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I agree, Mike. The whole blackface thing is a diversion from what we should be focusing on. What I do want to say is using some common sense and some logic, a racist, somebody who hates a certain race, is unlikely to paint themselves the color of that race.
That's a good point.
Going back 30 years to find a yearbook picture when somebody dressed up as Michael Jackson, is kind of ridiculous. Like I said, racists don't want to paint themselves to look like the people they hate. It's kind of a stupid thing to think.
Well, I think if somebody's painting themselves up as Michael Jackson, it's probably because they admire Michael Jackson. And of course, Michael Jackson's a poor example to use because look how he changed his skin color. I mean, I worked with him on the rock video for "Can You Feel It," and back then he was just as dark as the rest of his brothers. And then look how pale he was as he got to the end of his life.
Yeah, I agree. It's a diversion from what we should be focusing on. So that's all I wanted to add, just a comment. Thanks,
all right, well, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open. And again, we're talking Halloween. Halloween is when you get to dress up and do stuff. Remember this last Halloween? And schools were, literally issuing lists of costumes you were not allowed to come in because it would offend somebody somewhere. And, basically, the list of allowed costumes was very small. And it was things like, you can come as a ghost or you can come as a scarecrow. And then pretty much everything else was forbidden. We are becoming the nanny state. We're becoming Nazis is basically what it is. Now, over in New York, Democratic Representative Nydia Velasquez actually threatened a pro-Trump teen on social media, telling him he's right to be afraid of us and you should learn my name. Now, the teenager, C.J. Pearson, noted a woman sitting next to Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez during the President's State of the Union speech and joked that she kept trying to look away from the socialist who was repeatedly taking cues on what she should or should not applaud for. And so Pearson basically got on Twitter saying, "Who was that?" And he got this ugly reaction. Shows you what kind of respect the people in Congress have for us. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And if you would like to help out Republic Broadcasting, and they really do need it, we're running on very old equipment. It's outdated. It's failing is basically what it comes down to. The postal address where you can send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can make a credit or debit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. And we're going to go back to the phones to Joe in Tennessee. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, I made a donation yesterday. You do it right on the RBN page also. It's very easy to do. You just use your credit card number. And, you know, a lot of these other media people, they are actually funded by the CIA and were funded by Obama 2 years ago, right before he left office. So it's very important for a beacon of free speech like the RBN is for people who believe in free speech and free thinking to support it, because this is the real war. This is the real battle, because they're taking away our ability to get our message out. I mean, this is interesting because you're talking about the blackface issue. I actually had my Facebook account suspended for 30 days yesterday, and all I did was repost the picture that governor put on his yearbook page. And they said it would violate the community standards. So it's, you know, that's what's really interesting about this whole blackface issue is not like silly kids being doofuses and everything. It's more about the way that the rules are enforced. If you're a Republican, you better resign or they'll burn the city down. If you're a Democrat, he was just young, he was just this. You know, the media does backflips protecting him. They even put down that the guy's a Republican on CNN instead of saying he's actually a Democrat.
I saw that.
So to me, that it's really more about the cultural issues, and it really highlights the hypocrisy, the double standard, how the media is so in the favor of the Democrats. And to me, that's what this really is the issue is more about. And then it's the lieutenant governor being a rapist, and the fact that all these same, you know, believe women people on the Democratic Party, where are they to be found? You know, where are they? You know, they were out there screaming at senators in elevators all over Washington with Kavanaugh, and that was a ridiculous story with him. I mean, there was no rape involved. In this case, you have sodomy, oral sodomy, and nobody seems to care. So, you know, I understand your point about Chandra Levy and all that, and I look at it like, you know, you might be right, but at the same time, that this is a good a story to highlight the media and how it's in the tank for the Democrats and the hypocrisy of the left. And the fact that, as I've been saying on this radio show many times before, the left cloaks all these themselves in all these issues about race and about feminism, and it's really just a cloak in order for them to empower other leftists. It has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with women. It's just about propelling their left communist ideology through and using these as bludgeons to beat conservatives over the head with. So when I see a liberal, you know, governor who you know, do you ever see the commercials he produced against his Republican challenger Ed Gillespie?
No, I
where
missed
the
those.
guy's driving around in a truck chasing like minority kids around with a, you know, it was sick. And to see the hypocrisy so soon is, in my view, somewhat a form of karmic justice. So in that regard, I think it's an important story to talk about, just the out-and-out hypocrisy. This man put out one of the most vile commercials against his opponent, Ed Gillespie, calling him a racist. He was vile. And then to have this and not just the blackface, he had a guy in a Ku Klux Klan uniform. Now, I mean, I'm sorry, but you know, I'm a free kind of guy about this, but you know, that's something that goes a little bit farther than I'm comfortable with in a politician.
Well, you know, politics is a dirty business. It always has been. Back when LBJ was running for Congress, he actually started a rumor that his opponent engaged in bestiality. And of course, he had to make sure that the rumor didn't track back to him. But that's how these things get done. And you know,
yeah, that's the old line where LBJ says, "Yeah, let's just try to get him to deny it."
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, we can't accuse him of it, but we can force him to have to deny it. And what's really interesting, getting into the hypocrisy, is people are starting to really talk about all of the ads that CBS refused to run on the Super Bowl, including a couple that celebrated masculinity and being a man, and as kind of a pushback against Gillette. Anyway, Joe, got to let you go. Got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. So let's start talking about the war zones. And we're going to start with Venezuela. And Maduro is basically out there saying that he is the legitimate president of Venezuela, that he won the election. The election had international observers, was considered fair, open, and honest, better quality elections than we have in this country. And he's, of course, very angry over the United States basically creating this Juan Guaido. And then following that phone call from Mike Pence, Guaido stands up and says, "I'm the interim president. We're taking over here." And so Maduro is out there saying it's time to stop Trump's insane actions. And, you know, one of the things that has come on out is that there are as many demonstrations for Maduro as there are against him. And in fact, in some cases, video of the pro-Maduro demonstrations, which are large, is being basically labeled as anti-Maduro. And we saw them do the same thing in Iran. BBC got caught one time with this, you know, photo of this huge crowd saying, "Oh, they're against Ahmadinejad," and then an uncropped version of the exact same photo came on out, showing that Ahmadinejad was standing there on the balcony giving a speech, and everybody was cheering him. And Maduro is saying he doesn't care how history will remember him as long as it's not as a traitor, and that apparently is his mindset. That if he steps down from the presidency, that he's a traitor to his own people. Now, Mike Pompeo is out there claiming Hezbollah is active in Venezuela. And this appears to be an attempt to justify a possible U.S. military intervention. And, you know, people were saying that this was going to show up. ISIS is going to be down there. Al-Qaeda is going to be down there. And the U.S. is going to say, "Oh, we have to take the war on terror down to Venezuela." Because ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they're a movable feast. They can get dropped in any place the United States wants to invade. Oh, they're up in Afghanistan. Oh, they're in Iraq. Oh, they're over in Syria. Oh, they're in Libya. So they're setting the stage for that one here. Of course, as you know, European countries are on board with the United States and saying, "Oh yes, Maduro must go. Guaido is the president, and there should be a smooth and hopefully blood-free transition." I don't know about that part of it here. Montenegro came on in saying there needs to be free elections in Venezuela, which is ironic because Montenegro has never had elections themselves. But that's just how ridiculous this whole situation is getting. And again, Venezuela just had elections. And Maduro won. And, you know, the corporate media, of course, says, "Oh, he's a dictator. He's a dictator." Dictators don't get elected over and over and over again. Now, there's a story that came on out from Global Research up in Canada. It's a little bit of hidden history going on back to how the CIA and the FBI worked to overthrow Hugo Chavez and then later assassinate the Venezuelan state prosecutor Danilo Anderson. Now, he was killed by a car bomb in Caracas while investigating those who were behind the coup against Chavez. Now, Giovanni Jose Vasquez de Armas, a member of Colombia's right-wing paramilitary group called the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, claims he was in charge of logistics for the plot to kill Danilo Anderson, and apparently said that there had been a plan to assassinate Hugo Chavez as well, and it was all with the help of the FBI and the CIA. And now you know why the people of South America do not like the people of the United States, except, of course, for those who are coming across our border. And even when they get here, they still don't act like they like us very much. Another article, this one coming out of Mint Press News here, "The Making of Juan Guaido, How the U.S. Regime Change Laboratory Created Venezuela's Coup Leader." And it basically does a quick look back, because only a few months ago, nobody knew who this guy was. He's 35 years old, and, you know, basically only 20% of Venezuelans knew who this guy was before he stood up and said, "I'm the interim president." Even in his own party, he's a mid-level figure. But all it took was a single phone call from Vice President Pence, and Guaido got up there and proclaimed himself as president of Venezuela. I mean, even for the United States, the obviousness of this coup was just insane here. All right, we're going to grab a phone call, and we're going to go back here to Steve Elkins. And Steve, welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I know you got the one-call policy, but I'm asked to violate it this one time. Hey, talking about Guaido declaring himself as the interim president, which is complicit with going along with the U.S. bad coup, I don't quite understand why Maduro has not shown some power, some strength as the president, and actually maybe placed him under arrest, incarcerated him, because that's what I would do. He's part of the coup himself, and that would be sedition, trying to undermine a legitimate election, a legitimate vote. I don't quite understand why Maduro hasn't gone that direction, because that would show some force. It would show that he's president. Not sure why he hasn't gone that direction, because
he's been warned
quite obviously sedition.
He's been warned not to by Washington, D.C., and probably in the back channel discussions, they've said, if you arrest Guaido or you try and arrest the National Assembly or anything like that, we will invade.
I don't think the American people are going to handle that very well.
Well, I wish the American people would start getting a little bit more upset about all these wars that we're currently stuck in. You know, I remember when it was just Iraq, and, you know, there were protests taking place all over, and it's died out mostly because people are tired of protesting and not have the government listen to us. It seems like the American people have become quite accepting of being a war power.
Yeah, that's sad to hear. I know I've decided I'm going to take action. I'm going to form a protest group, and I don't know how it's going to turn out. Probably not as good as any of the other ones I've ever participated in. It seems like the government doesn't listen to us, but I'm certainly not going to be silent about this. Another war we don't need, and this is illegal all the way. This is illegal.
It is illegal. It is illegal. And as a matter of fact, legal scholars have gone in to take a look at Venezuela's constitution, because Guaido is claiming that under the constitution, he has the right to basically take over. And there's a provision in the Constitution. There are 6 scenarios whereby a president might no longer serve, and then that's followed by the protocols to be followed should a president-elect become unavailable to serve pre-inauguration. Now, the third paragraph contemplates presidential vacancies in the first 4 years of office. The last paragraph deals with presidential vacancies in the final 2 years of office. Now, Guaido is relying on a provision called abandonment of his position. Now, that's obviously never happened. Maduro isn't gone. He's still there. And if Maduro were to step down, the vice president would take over, the same like we have here. So Guaido, if he meant to usurp the presidency under the Constitution, he needed to do it between the time Maduro was actually elected and the time he was inaugurated, but he missed that window. And so he doesn't actually have a legal basis for anything that he's doing.
Yeah. Well, I think by Maduro taking word or taking advice or the threat serious from the United States is actually giving power to the United States in this and overthrowing the government. I think I would call the bluff, because I think the world is going to see this for what it really is. I don't think the American people are going to be too happy about it. I think there's going to be a big outcry to say, what, you just invaded a country that did no harm to you because you didn't like their president. Who wants to pick our president? We make a big stink about that. I think I would call the bluff and simply incarcerate the guy, put him under arrest, and show power, some force and power. Don't give that power to the United States, because they'll take it and run with it. I think I would call the bluff out.
Well, you know, time will solve that mystery. And of course, we're not getting a lot of information out of Venezuela that isn't being spun and distorted and twisted. The last we heard, Maduro has the military on his side, so there's really nothing Guaido can do short of a U.S. military intervention. And now with Pompeo out there saying, oh, ISIS and Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda, they're operating in Venezuela, we have to go in. It's part of the war on terror. And I think that's the direction they're going to go.
That's it, Mike. Hey, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I wanted to point out a couple of things here. Back when they lied us into the Iraq War in 2003, clearly it was a cabal of neocons.
Yes.
Who are also clearly identifiable as to what group they belong to. You can name them from Pearl, Wolfowitz, David Frum, Douglas Feith. You can go on and on. William Safire, Judith Miller. The whole ball of wax here. They've learned since then, and now in these new wars that were even in South America here, the people they have are all bought by the same guy.
Yes.
Sheldon Adelson owns Trump. Sheldon Adelson owns Bolton. Sheldon Adelson owns Elliot Abrams, who, by the way, you ran a great article the other day about Elliot Abrams put in charge of restoring democracy in Venezuela, has made a career of squashing it. It was one of your articles.
Yes.
The author of that article was on Scott Horton interviews, and it's pretty funny to hear him talk about it. But Elliot Abrams was involved, by the way, in the Iran-Contra deal,
yes,
the Nicaragua. He was also involved in the first Hugo Chavez thing that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And now he's the guy that's supposed to be in charge of restoring democracy. But he's also another Sheldon Adelson-owned neocon who wouldn't have been appointed since he was convicted of lying to Congress. And they put him back in the National Security Council because it didn't require vetting by Congress. He didn't have to be approved by Congress. It might take it against him for having lied to him in the past and being convicted of it. But at any rate, that's that's some of the stuff that's going on, and they've learned. They're putting Goyim out in front, and just paying. They're just bought and paid for shills instead of putting their own guys out like they did last time.
Yeah.
And by the way, they're using Hezbollah now. There's a reason.
Yes.
Linking it to Hezbollah, giving another reason to trash Lebanon or Syria.
And Venezuela. I mean, Pompeo's claiming that Hezbollah is down in Venezuela. Why Hezbollah would be in Venezuela is a complete mystery, but that's the story. But again, this is more outright war propaganda. Every time the U.S. is going to invade a country, we've got to bring them democracy. That's always been the excuse. And in, the more than half century since the end of World War II, the United States has not actually brought a working democracy to any of these countries that they've gone into. They've always installed a tyrant and a secret police force. They did it in Iran in 1953. They did it in Chile in 1973, the Philippines under Marcos. And that's the pattern.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't think of any time we've ever installed a democracy. I guess you might be able to say Japan or Germany at the end of World War II, but that's about it. And even that's debatable over the long term. But Mike, the other thing is, how long will we even be able to talk about this? Because, again, it's illegal. It will be under Senate Bill 1 to criticize Israel. I want to ask everybody out there to think, if you can't criticize Israel without a penalty, well, what about getting together in a group to, like, say, picket the White House or picket the Israeli embassy? Would that also be illegal?
Okay.
And how about just assembling with the intent to do that? Just assembling, freedom of assembly. Think how many ways that this can morph into even really, really. It's already bad enough, but. Okay, think how many ways this can morph into.
Reading Senate Bill 1, basically what it does is it's encouraging the states to continue on with the bills that have already been passed, which make it illegal for the state to do business with companies that support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. There does not, as of yet, appear to be an individual prohibition. But that may be showing. But somebody's got to get this up to that Supreme Court for a First Amendment challenge.
And Marco Rubio, the author of this gem, owned by Adelson, by the way, comes out and says that it's not aimed at individuals. You're right, that's what he says. Yeah. He says it's aimed at companies, and companies aren't the same as people. Although, with Citizens United, right, they claim that companies are the same as people.
And that the companies have First Amendment rights.
They don't want to do away with that because that's where they get all their money, all those big corporate donations that they can open their arms as wide as they can and have them fill up their pockets. So it's just, they just pick and choose whatever they want.
Well, again, you're right. Under Citizens United, corporations are considered persons with First Amendment rights. So this is going to lead to a really bizarre legal wrangle.
Well, it's amazing that there are 26 legislatures that have had majorities willing to sell out our rights, and 13 more pending, and now this thing passed in the Senate. It's going to pass in the House, and Trump will sign it. But you know, it's amazing that there's so many people willing to take the money and sell us all out.
Yeah. It's it's how corrupt our government has become. It's worse than Rome just under Caligula. I mean, that's how bad it is. And again, it's another sign to me that it might not hold together for all that much longer.
No, that's a real question. I mean,
when you look at all the infighting, when you look at all the political infighting taking place right now, it's a government that's tearing itself apart. Anyway, Peter, I'm going to have to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back with more news after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And somebody just sent me an animated GIF from Steve Martin's movie, The Jerk, where he's out there saying, "I was born a poor black child." Are they going to start banning stuff like that now? It's really out of control. Okay, let's move over to Syria. And despite Donald Trump's statement that he was going to start pulling our troops out of Syria, the U.S. troop count in Syria has now increased by 50%. And they're bringing in a lot of equipment, and observers are saying it looks a lot more like a surge than a withdrawal. So apparently 1,000 additional troops have already been deployed to Syria. So the man did, in fact, lie to us. The war machine goes on. And as I said the other day, it almost seems like it doesn't matter who we vote for anymore. The war machine continues. And we have this working inner circle of all the people who came out of the Project for the New American Century. And that's become the agenda. The United States is no longer a republic. It's an empire. So there's another article. This one came out of Blacklisted News, and it's basically talking about the rationale for keeping U.S. troops inside Syria. Now, remember, the legitimate government of Syria doesn't want them there. They never gave them permission to be there. And so far, the Syrian government hasn't engaged in actual combat with them, at least intentionally. There have been a couple of friendly fire incidents here. But the propaganda that's coming on out to we, the American people, is that we need to prevent the return of Islamic State. But where ISIS used to be, west of the Euphrates River, they've been permanently taken back by the Syrian Arab Army and its Russian and Iranian allies without support from the United States. And in fact, despite Washington's best efforts to hamper Damascus security operations. Because we were hearing from the commanders in Syria that the U.S. appeared to be aiding ISIS. The Syrian Arab Army would get ISIS basically surrounded, and the U.S. forces would open up a corridor. So Syria can take care of itself, and you need to remember ISIS itself appears to have been a creation of the United States, or at least it was seized on and exploited as a proxy force in Syria here. 1 million Syrians have fled Syria since the United States began its invasion of Iraq. 1 million Syrians have fled Syria since the United States began its invasion of Iraq. 1 million Syrians have fled Syria since the United States began its invasion of Iraq. 1 million Syrians have fled Syria since the United States began its invasion of Iraq. 1 million Syrians have fled Syria since the United States began its invasion of Iraq. 1 million Syrians have fled Syria since the United States began its invasion of Iraq. 1 million Syrians have fled Syria since the United States began its invasion of Iraq. 1 million Syrians have fled Syria since the United States began its invasion of Iraq. 1 million Syrians have fled Syria since the United States began its invasion of Iraq. 1 million Syrians have fled Syria since the United States began its invasion of Iraq. 1 million Syrians have fl So Trump has also announced during his pre-Super Bowl interview that he plans to move the U.S. troops from Syria to Iraq to watch Iran and protect Israel. So they're not coming home. They're just changing the dust that they walk through. And, oh, we got to take a break for station identification. We'll be back with more of this after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're talking about events over in the Middle East, where Trump has basically announced that he's moving U.S. troops from Syria to Iraq to watch Iran and to protect Israel. So they're not coming home after all. So, I have some issues with this. First of all, why do we need to protect Israel? Israel has a powerful military, which we all paid for pretty much, and they have nuclear weapons. That's pretty much an open secret right now. They have nuclear weapons. Nobody is going to mess with Israel. Okay? And the other part about watching Iran, why are you watching Iran from Iraq? Iran is allowing the continuation of nuclear inspections by the IAEA, and even U.S. intelligence chiefs are saying there is no indication that Iran is working to build nuclear weapons. Remember, Iran historically is a very peaceful country. They have not initiated a war of conquest against another country in over 200 years, something that cannot be said about either the United States or Israel. So what this is really all about is a garrison for Iraq. Now, Iraq wants the U.S. to leave. Syria wants the U.S. to leave. And the U.S. apparently, like ancient Rome, is going to garrison these provinces, if you will, to make sure that they don't get any silly ideas about independence and running their own countries. Okay, apparently an Israeli reconnaissance satellite, surveillance satellite, is showing that Russian S-300 missiles in Syria have been set up and they're ready to fire. And apparently Israel is obviously concerned about this. And a lot of people were wondering during the previous Israeli attacks why the S-300s had not been used. And it probably comes down to training. Because when Russia first delivered the S-300 missiles into Syria, they said it was going to take about 3 months to train Syrian forces to use these things properly. But it looks like that milestone has now been achieved. And I think that may be the reason why Israel isn't flying warplanes into Syria anymore. They'll basically stand off over Lebanon and lob rockets. So we'll see what happens with that here. Now, getting on back to Afghanistan and sort of reinforcing this comment that there doesn't seem to be a timeline for a troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. The Taliban has said no. There's absolutely no timeline. And a Taliban official said the United States had promised to withdraw half its troops from Afghanistan by the end of April, but the U.S. is now saying they have not decided on a time frame for that. I am getting a clear feeling here. Trump is not in control of the war machine. Now, the president is supposed to set policy, and he's supposed to be the commander-in-chief, but very clearly he's lost control. I think he genuinely wanted to bring troops home from Syria and Afghanistan. And I think he probably is not happy with this idea of going into Venezuela. But apparently he's not in charge anymore. Over in Europe, Macedonia is getting ready to join NATO. They've signed a key document that would see Macedonia as the 30th member of the world's biggest military alliance. And obviously, of course, this is very threatening to Russia. Now, remember the other day we were talking about this propaganda that was coming on out about how Russia was getting ready to invade Sweden. And oh, poor Sweden, if they're not a member of NATO, they could really be in for what for. So it looks like they're going to try and get Sweden into NATO as well. We're being set up for a major world war, and a lot of it apparently is going to take place on Europe. And I can't imagine the European people who have been through this twice before are at all comfortable with this. So apparently Greece finally backed down. They had been blocking Macedonia's membership over this name dispute. But Macedonia has agreed to change its name to North Macedonia to gain access to NATO and the EU. Oddly enough, the people of Macedonia were not happy with it. There have been protests. They wanted to keep their historically significant name here. When Trump pulled out of the INF, one of the things that happened was that Russia released a satellite photo taken some months back out in Arizona of a Raytheon plant, which was clearly still under construction, and said that this was the most likely site for the resuming of constructing intermediate range missile systems. Well, the Pentagon is now denying that. John Rood is saying that because the U.S. has been in full compliance with the INF, it has no plans to create or deploy an intermediate range missile system. And basically, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy made his statement after Russia indicated Tuesday it will also abandon the INF after the U.S. withdrawal, with plans to develop 2 new land-based missile launch systems by 2021 to counter U.S. developments in its missile capabilities. Now, I, for one, think that this is more, keep the American people calm and placated. Because why pull out of the INF if you're not planning on making intermediate range nuclear missiles? But again, look at all the treaties that had been put in place to make a safer world. The Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, INF, and bit by bit, they've all been shut down. And it shows a clear intention by U.S. policymakers to confront and, they think, subdue Russia. But I don't think that's going to happen. If you remember how Russia performed in World War II, they're tough. They're very, very tough. Okay, we're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. And again, Russia is saying that their intelligence is the United States will be deploying modified nuclear weapons in Europe in the first half of 2020, basically a year from now. This is from Anatoly Sidorov, the UNTSC chief of the Collective Security Treaty Organization. And it went on to say the U.S. intentions are to further exacerbate the international situation, and it's demonstrated by its Advanced Aviation Nuclear Weapons Mass Production Program, which was apparently approved at the end of 2018. So we're back to a nuclear arms race. And I think it's worth remembering how close we came to accidental disaster during the last one. All right, we're going to take a phone call now from Art off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. You asked the question, why does the United States need to be protecting Israel from Iran? And I have heard that question asked a lot. And I always struggle to try to find an answer people can relate to other than some other lame whatever. But I got to thinking when the question was asked a little while ago, when you asked a little while ago about that, and I got to thinking about, you're familiar with a TV show called Babylon 5?
Yes. I briefly worked on it.
There are 2 races. You worked on it. Wow, I'll tell you, a fantastic TV series. I really enjoyed it. But there are 2 races, the Minbari and the Noth. Now, the Noth would be Ambassador Jakar.
Okay.
And the Minbari would be Ambassador Milando. And they were having an argument which was over the previous Noth-Minbari War, the old Minbari War.
Okay.
And Milando had said something about, the whole war, and the question was asked, why did, I forget who it was, maybe you'll remember the episode, why it was that that Londo and other Minbari had to be so conniving and work from the shadows, controlling things in the shadows. And Jakar turned around and said, now picture Malondo is Israel and Jakar is Iran.
Yes.
Jakar said, because the Minbari don't have the stomach for a real fight. Now, why do I say that? How many times have we heard about Israeli IDF soldiers and whatever shooting civilians and beating people up and all this other, all this stuff, but, we never hear of them actually engaging the enemy face on. Always have to work from a distance in the shadows. They can never take their enemy head on. They always have to have someone else take up the front.
Well, the last couple of times they went into Lebanon, they didn't do very well. And it's thought that, Israel's military policy is to focus on the weapon systems and that their troops are, in fact, not really well trained. But again, Iran is not going to attack or invade Israel. It has no reason to. And again, Israel has nuclear weapons. They've got tanks, they've got aircraft, they've got lots and lots of rockets, and they have nuclear weapons. Iran is not going to do a thing.
Yeah, and I mean, the estimates are anywhere between 400 and 800 nuclear warheads.
Yes.
Now, come on, with 400 to 800 nuclear warheads, don't tell me you don't have a way to deploy them. So what the heck are you afraid of?
No, it's just a way to get more, money and help from the U.S. government. Oh, help us, we're victims, evil Iran. What Israel really wants, though, is to provoke a confrontation with Iran that would lead to its being basically smashed up the way Iraq was. Because Iran is a regional political power that is a rival to Israel, and Israel wants them to go away, and they want Americans to pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more thought real quick. I was really impressed with Donald Trump the other night when he gave his speech. But upon hearing, as you pointed out, instead of troop withdrawals from Syria, more troops are being sent into Syria.
Yes.
How disappointing.
Well, at this point, I wasn't disappointed because I didn't think he was telling the truth. Because, we went through this early last year where he was out there saying we're going to start pulling troops out, and it didn't happen. Trump is not in control. And, the House Democrats are going to keep him buried under all of these investigations and everything. And, basically those insiders, the John Boltons and so forth, they're running the show.
And, well, it's been an up and down roller coaster with me and Trump. One day I like him because he seems to be finally doing something, and then all of a sudden, within a couple of days, he's right back to the old stuff. I don't think Trump ever was actually in control. I think I think we're just kidding ourselves. At this point, I don't know what to expect at this point, other than something's got to give at some point. And as far as I'm concerned, come the next election, I'm voting for nobody. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. I wish we had a none of the above on our ballots, because if none of the above actually won, then the political parties would have to find another candidate that was more acceptable to the American people. But every election is, trying to pick the lesser of two evils, which is still evil. And it's a stupid way to run a country. What can I tell you? Anyway, Art, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open. All righty. Over at the United Nations Security Council, they tried to put forward a draft resolution criticizing Israel's expulsion of the monitors from Hebron, which, by the way, that goes all the way back to the Oslo Accords. And Netanyahu said last week that he was not going to renew the mandate of the temporary international presence in Hebron, accusing the observers of being anti-Israel without going into any specifics. And a lot of people are very concerned this may signal a new Israeli attack on Hebron itself. Norway which has headed the multi-country observer mission for 22 years, said the one-sided Israeli decision can mean that the implementation of an important part of the Oslo Accords is discontinued. Yes, that's exactly what it means. Again, looking at Israel, the home demolitions are continuing. They're being declared quasi-legal because Israel's top court is basically enabling and validating the disposition of Palestinians and the demolition of their homes in the occupied West Bank, where in theory, Israel's top court does not really have jurisdiction because it's an occupied territory. But apparently, Israel's Supreme Court is enabling the State of Israel to continue implementing these illegal policies. And Israel says, hey, the courts say we can do this. So the Israeli rights group B'Tselem put out a report called Fake Justice and just details how the state's policy minimizes Palestinian construction and aims to expand the building of the illegal Jewish settlements. Okay. Over in Lebanon, their parliament speaker, Nabi Berri, is saying that the Israeli regime is violating Lebanon's sovereignty in a dangerous manner by licensing a company to exploit an area for oil and gas resources near a disputed region. Now, this is a maritime dispute, and it runs over a sea zone of about 800 square kilometers. The underlying Levant basin of the eastern Mediterranean has been shown to contain large natural gas reserves, possibly even crude oil. And Israel just arbitrarily redrew its ocean borders to basically slant into that Levant basin, which had previously been considered Lebanese territory. So they're considering it an infringement. And they're basically saying Israel is targeting the oil wealth and the waters. That's exactly what they're doing. Same thing they're doing in the Golan. You know, when you have somebody who is a thief and they get away with it, they're going to continue to steal. Steal land in the West Bank. Sure, get away with that. Steal oil in the Golan. Sure, get away with that. Steal oil from Lebanon. Sure, get away with that. It's a rogue nation here. Or maybe we could call it a pirate kingdom. I can say that because I'm not trying to get any contracts with any state governments here. Now, the Jerusalem Post has actually come on out saying that they believe the United States is meddling in their upcoming election to help Netanyahu. And basically, it involves this photo of Trump and Netanyahu, which is being used as a campaign poster. And the Jerusalem Post was looking at the number of likes and comments under some of the social media that was talking about this, and they find it suspicious. They find it very, very suspicious. So everybody's meddling in everybody else's elections. All righty. Last Sunday, 70 New York human rights advocates gathered in a protest in front of Carnegie Hall to demonstrate against an extravagant fundraising brunch and performance by the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra. Now, the IPO, a self-proclaimed cultural ambassador representing Israel, is trying to orchestrate a positive image of Israel to divert attention from its human rights abuses as part of the Brand Israel initiative launched all the way back in 2006. That's exactly what they're trying to do. And that's why, you know, they're grabbing Eurovision, and there are suspicions that that vote was rigged because just being for Eurovision, it's not like it has a lot of security. And now you have all these people who want to boycott Eurovision because it is just this tacky effort to make Israel look good at a time when Israel is behaving very, very badly. Okay, we have got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Palestine advocates are pointing to the fact that key Democrats voted against that Senate Bill 1. including pretty much everybody who has announced their intention to run in 2020. And other Democratic senators who've not yet formally thrown their names into the running, like Sherrod Brown, Bernie Sanders, and Jeff Merkley, also voted against the legislation, which unfortunately it passed in a 77-23 vote. Now, this is kind of interesting because just now on Fox News, they were running a story about how all of the candidates running in 2020 are staying silent on the Robert Mueller probe. And there may be a clue in there that the Democratic Party is in disarray, and that observers are thinking there could be a major falling out or collapse in the next year or so, which I think would be a good thing. So it is an interesting clue. I mean, normally you would think that those people running for 2020 would have voted for the bill because they're going to be courting support from Israel supporters inside the United States of America. So that's a very, very telling bit of information here. Okay. Apparently, France and the U.S. State Department have finalized an agreement to pay Holocaust deportees, and individuals with approved claims will receive a letter from the State Department notifying the parties that they will get a payment with an additional 97% increase from their original stipend. Now, my question. If the Holocaust happened as described, why are the U.S. taxpayers rather than German ones paying these people? It doesn't really make any sense. All right. Retired General Dennis Leitch was being interviewed on Newsmax TV and basically addressing the question, should women register for the draft? And I actually got an email from somebody the other day saying they thought the draft was over. And the draft itself, yes, that's been shut down. But all the way back at the beginning of all this warmongering, they again required young men, when they turn 18, to register for selective service so they would be in the database to be called up when the draft was brought back. So this retired Major General from the Army is saying, well, if women are not required to register, then men will say, well, wait a minute, in the interests of equality, why should we? And if that happens and it's a successful argument, we'll see selective service go by the boards or run the risk of it. So basically he's trying to use the feminist argument, the equality argument, to sneak through this idea that women will be required to register for the draft. And in times past, there have been bills about a draft that have been in Congress in committee. They didn't get to a floor vote, that have included women being drafted into the military service. And that's also a very telling piece of information. It tells us that the military isn't really able to fill its ranks with current recruitment and may not be able to even with a male-only draft. And generally, when you are a country and you start putting your women into military positions, it's another indicator that you're coming to the end of the line. Okay, let's talk about the economic news here just a little bit. Another article, this one from investors.com, talking about the public employee pensions. And they're all defunded. They're on the edge of bankruptcy. They're calling it the next big financial crisis. And the article is saying that, the media is focusing on the federal government's huge debt, not to mention the additional missing money. And there's now a new report that says the states face their own ticking time bomb, which is the exploding liabilities for lavish, note that word, state and local public employee pensions. Reform won't be easy, but there is no choice. Translation: these pensions got defunded during the meltdown of the mortgage-backed security fraud back in 2008, and the retirees are going to be made to pay for it. That's what they're really saying here. That's why they use the word lavish, to make it look like, oh, these people are living high on the hog on these public pensions. But these pensions all invested in these mortgage bundles because Wall Street's pet ratings agencies rated them AAA. And pension funds are only allowed to invest in AAA. And then the whole thing fell apart. So, another little article. U.S. home sales are plummeting. Nobody's sure why. And they're not sure why it's happening in an economy that remains hale and hearty by most measures. Well, this is a classic case of real world, nobody has money, versus media propaganda, the economy is great, colliding head on. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha America, welcome back to the show here. We're talking about the economic news here. And little article that came on out basically saying the value of the dollar has no guarantee whatsoever. And it really hasn't ever since Nixon delinked it from gold. The value of the dollar is basically what people will trade for it. And it gets manipulated a lot. And, you know, the United States is a country that's been running budget and trade deficits for almost a century, with a total debt including unfunded liabilities in the hundreds of trillions of dollars. It's a phantom economy. It's all make-believe. It's more like a religion than an economy. Another article, this one came on out from Investment Watch blog. As credit asset bubbles pop, the dominoes start falling. I mean, the indicators are all window bad, but still kind of bad here. WikiLeaks leaked a document called the U.S. Coup Manual, and it reveals that the U.S. government and military use the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank as unconventional weapons. And we've talked about this before, getting nations into debt, then sabotaging their ability to repay, and then using that imposed and growing debt in order to control them. And this U.S. Coup Manual confirms that. This is how the U.S. government bends other countries to its will. Okay, remember last year we had that GOP tax overhaul, and the major U.S. banks were able to cut their collective tax bill by around $21 billion. And then they turned around and fired thousands of employees, tightened lending standards. This is coming out of Bloomberg. And again, started writing themselves huge bonuses. It's a mess over there. Okay, we've been talking about this for a few days now. And the story is over at Quadriga CX, which is a crypto exchange up in Canada. The CEO, Gerald Cotton, was over in India supposedly getting ready to build an orphanage there, and was reported to have died. And a lot of people were wondering what was going on, because apparently he took the keys to the exchange's cold wallets with him and nobody else had them. His customers' coins are immovable. It's about a $150 million fiasco. And a Bloomberg report coming out is saying that maybe this conspiracy theory is a conspiracy fact, because apparently there's been some very suspicious activity involving the wallets. First and foremost, with blockchain, you're supposed to be able to audit it and know where the coins actually are, and they can't find more than 1,000 of the coins. So it's looking like this guy may have just cashed out and headed off to India, where he's going to live the life of Riley, as it were. So it's another reason to be very careful about cryptos. You know, I'm a great believer in, have your money in your own pocket. we've heard so many of these crypto exchange scandals. We've seen so many scandals involving the regular banks. Trustworthiness is something that just doesn't exist in our economy anymore, or our government here. So let's talk about immigration here. And a pro-Trump group has taken Trump's demand for border wall funding to the streets around Capitol Hill, warning that a barrier is needed to thwart 1,809 illegal crossing attempts every single day. And that's a lot of people pouring into the country. Now, this group is called America First Policies. They promote President Trump's immigration agenda. They've got a big truck with a billboard ticker that displays the minute-by-minute count of illegal crossing attempts at the U.S.-Mexico border. Now, so far, there have been some 66,000 attempts this year. And America First Policies said that another attempt occurs every 48 seconds. This is based on data from U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Experts have estimated that about half of all of these illegal entry attempts actually succeed. So that's 900 new illegal immigrants into the country every single day. Now, as you know, the argument is still going on over in the Congress about a new budget to continue the government after the 15th of this month. And Nancy Pelosi is still out there saying not a dollar for a wall. She's just standing firm on that and enjoying her power. But apparently, New York Democratic Representative Tom Suozzi basically was on a local news show saying he's actually open to the idea of a border wall. He says there needs to be a barrier of some type. And I'm sure Pelosi's going to call him up and give him an earful. I still think back to that video of that Democratic representative going, "Watch your rear end," caught on camera here. New Mexico's new governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, has now withdrawn most of the National Guard from the New Mexico border, saying that there's not an overwhelming national security crisis. It's not a problem. She says she rejects the federal contention there exists an overwhelming national security crisis along the border, along which are some of the safest communities in the country. So she's definitely an open border person. All right, let's grab a phone call now from Jim in New York. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Mike. I notice in conservative circles this Alexandria Cortez has become like a lightning rod to hate someone on the left. But she made an interesting quote here. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. She said, quote, "We only have empty pockets when it comes to the morally right things to do. When it comes to tax cuts for billionaires, and when it comes to unlimited war, we seem to be able to invent that money very easily."
Yes. Yeah, well, she's definitely right about that, and I read the quote. And interestingly enough, on Fox right now, they're talking about a New York Times op-ed calling to abolish billionaires. So I imagine those billionaires have got to be getting very, very nervous right now, and they're calling all of their pet congressmen and saying, "Don't you dare go along with this. We worked very hard to make the American people's money our money, and we're not going to give it up." And Cortez, I think, she made some bad moves after she won her primary and then won the election. And she did draw a lot of abuse. A lot of people are saying finally the Democrats have their own version of Sarah Palin. But she does make a valid point. We're always talking about there's no money for infrastructure, there's no money for the homeless or the homeless veterans. But when it comes to starting another war, like in Venezuela, yeah, the money's going to be there.
Yeah. So I wouldn't, I noticed on the alt-right types, they're vilifying this woman. But, even a liberal who I disagree with on most things, she makes a quote like that. That's a real eye-opener. Like, hey, she can't be all that bad.
Well, Sarah Palin wasn't, being goofy all the time either. So we'll see how Alexandria does. I mean, she's certainly being looked at as a rising star. Personally, I still favor Tulsi Gabbard.
Yes. Oh, yeah, I like Tulsi. Again, she's another, quote, liberal. And, they've twisted the words around. I mean, they say liberal, conservative, like a conservative. What's conservative about wasting $6 trillion on wars? How is that conservative?
Well, you're right. The labels don't mean anything anymore. I mean, the original definitions of liberal and conservative was in the exercise of government power. Conservatives basically went along with the adage that government rules best that rules least. And they were very conservative about passing laws. They wouldn't pass laws that were unnecessary. Liberals, on the other hand, go the opposite way, that everything can be fixed with a new law or regulation by the government, and especially when they got tangled up with this idea that our minds can be controlled by controlling the environment, which came out of that Margaret Mead fraud, then they had a justification to start passing laws about everything.
Yes. On your show yesterday, you were talking about these celebrities criticizing Trump's speech. And, I looked at some of their quotes. It was all about sexism, racism. You notice they never criticized Trump on the wars. Notice that.
Well, they ought to.
I think that's... Absolutely. I think that's by design, because the corporate media, they get on all these, what I consider trivial fake issues, racism, sexism, but they never criticize Trump when it comes to bombing countries, drone attacks. I also read a disturbing article that in Trump's first 2 years, he dropped more bombs than Obama did in 4. Now, I can't verify that, but that's a very disturbing article.
Yeah, well, I mean, the war machine is just out of control here, and again, we're going to wind up in a world war. There's really no way to stop this, because at some point, Russia and China and whoever is still in their sphere of influence are going to say, "Look, we can't go any further." And
I don't know who's going to fight it. I don't know who. I think it would go to a missile war, because I don't know where you're going to get the troops. Where are the troops going to get? They're already stretched way too thin as it is.
Well, you're absolutely right. And, the United States can't physically invade either Russia or China. And you're right. It would be an air and missile war. And again, the risk of a nuclear exchange is definitely there with all these new missiles pouring into Europe.
Yes, very disturbing. Trump, do you remember the ad in the 90s, Andre Agassi, the tennis player?
Yes, I do.
Image is everything. The Canon camera, image is everything.
Yes.
And that's what Trump is, just like Obama was. He's an image of a conservative populist,
middle
America
again,
person.
Again, he's proving himself either to have been a total fraud or a very, very weak leader. And if he's, but again, I go with weak leader because if he was just being a fraud, he wouldn't have announced he was pulling the troops out of Afghanistan and Syria. I think he seriously, personally wanted to do that. But he is surrounded by controllers on all sides, and he doesn't have the spine to stand up to them.
Yeah, I don't think he can. I think, at least in the realm of foreign policy, I think it's been taken out of his hands. I really do. I don't
Absolutely.
He says we're going to withdraw from Syria, but one of your previous callers said we're increasing to Syria, and I wouldn't doubt it.
About
Who's going to know? The media?
Another 1,000 troops have already gone in, along with a lot of new equipment.
I mean, the media's not going to report it.
I think they're gearing up we're getting these reports from Russia that the White Helmets and al-Nusra, or whatever they call themselves this week, have started moving these containers of chlorine into one of these disputed areas, and I think they're going to have another false flag gas attack to blame on Assad, and the hue and cry will be, well, on to Damascus.
Yeah, it's very possible. And Trump, I mean, he says great things, but remember, you go by their actions,
yes,
not what they say. Well, that's all I have to say. Thank you very much, Mike. Have a great show.
All right, thank you very much, Jim. We're going to let you go and switch over to Tom in Connecticut. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks, Mike. With all this talk from the new members of Congress about 70%, 90% tax rates, whatever they want to throw around to get some press, no one ever seems to address the issue of massive government waste.
Yes.
So where is all this new revenue going to go? And how is it going to be administered? And, that just kind of blows past the board. Nobody wants to really talk about that I'm aware of.
Well, we cover government waste and especially military waste every once in a while here, but again, it's one of those things that is not covered by the corporate media. There have been a few politicians in the past, a few members of Congress rather, who literally made a point of regularly talking about that. There was one member of Congress who had his Golden Fleece Award, where he would talk about those things.
Yes.
But again, I think this is grandstanding by the Democrats, because Congress is owned, and they're owned by the billionaires. And so this is going to go nowhere.
The numbers that Catherine Austin Fitts and the fellow from University of Michigan that talk about the $20 trillion missing and those kind of things. And I mean, I try to start conversations about that with people that raise issues about how horrible Trump is, especially because that's kind of the go-to for anyone that has issues with anxieties about these times. But once again, there's no credibility as to who is spending our money and how they're spending it. It's just massive new revenues. I mean, I see things about the highest revenues were collected during the last quarter, and yet the deficits continue to just ramp up unabated, just continue going and going and going.
Yeah, it's the military spending. And here's the stark reality. Even if you stripped all of the wealth of all of America's billionaires, it's still just a tiny dent in the national debt. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I want to jump back here to Venezuela, because the Independent over in Great Britain has come out with a monstrous piece of Beck's. The headline reads, Maduro blockades bridge on Colombia border to stop humanitarian aid entering country. And slugline is, Venezuela's military have barricaded a bridge at a key border crossing with Colombia in a challenge to a U.S.-backed effort by the opposition to bring humanitarian aid into the beleaguered nation. No, what Maduro is concerned about is, as we have seen so many other times under the guise of humanitarian aid, they're actually bringing in weapons and military supplies for the opposition. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I was going to talk about that, the blockade on the bridge. Beware those bearing gifts. U.S. aid. I mean, it's the same. Maduro should know the playbook by now, because Chavez, they did the same thing too. But it's different now because he knows, the Russians know, the Chinese know. And, Mike, the longer this drags on, it might hurt the Venezuelan people a little more, but there's alternate ways for Maduro to come out with getting stuff from China and Russia, right? Because long term, it looks like Guaido is kind of a failure for them.
Yeah.
I think.
No,
I mean, what do you think? I mean, because,
that's why Pompeo is out there screaming that Hezbollah and ISIS and Al Qaeda are all over Venezuela. They're going to go on in militarily.
Yeah, but that's so over the top. I mean, there's no way he believes that. I mean, come on. That's the stupidest thing I ever heard anybody say. I mean, they're getting desperate when you got to say stupid stuff like that. But, Mike, I don't think there's going to be any invasion because of the chance of them having, like, jungle warfare. But I do see them trying to do special forces insertions and this or that. But, I mean, Maduro's no dope.
No.
His army might not be, first world or anything, but it's not like doesn't suck either.
Again, they've got the home court advantage, and again, these are people who are fighting for their own homes and lands, things that they can see with their eyes. They're not just there for a paycheck. So I think, the U.S. is getting ready to probably start a guerrilla campaign or basically replace Syria, where they go on in and set up a bunch of opposition groups. They may be bringing in supplies to arm ISIS so that they can say, ooh, ISIS is there, we have to go on in. And then try and use that to force Maduro from power. But yeah, so far Guaido doesn't seem to be making a lot of progress. The vast majority of the military is still with Maduro. The so-called defectors that were thrown all over the media all turned out to be fake, retired, living in other countries. So I think Maduro holds the upper hand right now, and he's being very, very careful not to give the United States an excuse to invade. Anyway, we got to take a break for station identification. Do you have any more, Dustin?
Yeah, can you hold me over?
I'm going to hold you over. Stay on the line. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And speaking of World War III being a bad idea, it's apparently Russia, the United States, and France have all test-launched nuclear-capable missiles within hours of one another. So they were ramped up and ready to go when the U.S. pulled out of the INF treaty here. All righty, let's go back to the phones. Dustin in New Jersey, you had more for us.
Yeah, Mike, I still want to stay on Venezuela. Remember, Guaido only has like a 0.5%, people who like follow him because he's an extremist.
Yes.
So there's no army he has. You know what I mean? Nobody will back him. The majority of people are against the sanctions, right? And they're also against like the coup. So there's nothing there. And you don't think Maduro has people in Colombia or Brazil? I mean, like I said, he's not stupid. The Venezuelans have been there for like a long time, obviously, so they know they have people around that part of the world. But I just don't think there's no army for the opposition per se, that small percent to grab. Because even remember, it's a divided opposition. Most of the opposition don't like Guaido and his group. Those who know him.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's before he announced he was going to be the interim president, only 1 out of every 5 Venezuelans had ever even heard his name. He's a mid-level in his own party. They don't even really like him all that much. But he was courted by the United States, and he's making his power play. I think if this goes to a military confrontation, we're going to see Americans in the jungles of Venezuela, or we're going to find a proxy army somewhere. Maybe we're going to get Colombia to invade Venezuela for us.
Mike, if I could switch real quick, did you talk about? I know you talked about about Powell from the Federal Reserve. He came out and says like the American dream is basically over.
Yes.
Did you see that article? I mean, if you look back in the 50s, it was like a man who went to work, right? He had the house, the wife, right, and this or that. And you look now, it's just like there's nothing like that anymore.
No,
that was when America
it really isn't. But at the end of World War II, the United States, between the Bretton Woods Agreement and the fact that we were pretty much the only nation that still had a viable industrial base, we were doing great. We were selling products all over the world. The money was pouring on in, and the good times were just rolling along. And since that time, there have been several really bad policy decisions, plunging us into debt during the 12 years of Reagan-Bush, pouring more money into the military, Nixon pulling us out of gold, abandoning the gold link to the Federal Reserve note. These were all bad decisions, and they were all brought about because of previous bad decisions. They go from one bad choice to the next bad choice to the next bad choice to the next bad choice.
And remember, the Chinese weren't like they are now. And remember, Trump, if you listen to what people say, they'll tell you what their competitors, you know what I mean? Like, this is what it's all about. And China's kicking the crap out of us now. And I don't think we can reverse that now. Whatever Trump, I mean, it's just too many forces. Trump and Trump's against Trump, and I doubt you can reverse it. And that's what it's just about, competitiveness of economics. Right?
Well, that's really what it comes down to. And in fact, there have actually been reports out of the Pentagon saying that, Russia and China's economies and manufacturing represent a strategic threat. They're basically admitting the United States isn't number one anymore in those areas. We've allowed our manufacturing to decline. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. The one thing the United States has is this huge military, and everybody says, well, let's just go ahead and use it. I mean, that was the policy that came out of the Project for the New American Century. We're the world's remaining superpower, let's act like it.
And remember, the last thing before I get off the line, Mike, is that, remember that article that says Russia economy is going to surpass Germany's, and Germany's is the largest in Europe.
Yep.
So... all right, thanks, Mike. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Anthony in Tucson. Aloha, Anthony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, it's Anthony in Tucson. There's about 19 subjects that have to be addressed as to what's going on with this criminal government. And it's not a swamp that's in Washington, D.C., it's a cesspool. And it started with 1913 when Woodrow Wilson, in violation of the Constitution, fraudulently enacted the Federal Reserve Act.
Yes.
When there wasn't 2/3 of the Congress present to ratify and get that amendment to even apply income tax, which violates your 4th and 5th Amendment rights. The government is not even allowed to know your name, yet you tell them your name, your address, who you work for, how much you get paid, who you give it to, where you put it, and now they even tell you where to put the money.
Yes. They're telling you what to buy. You must buy vaccines. You must buy a little ear thing for your cell phone.
That's right. It's all part of the niggardly element. When you research the word niggardly or niggard,
yeah,
you'll decide what every American has been forced into. The Federal Reserve was granted a title of nobility, which violates the Constitution. The 13th Amendment was really an amendment not to allow lawyers to have the title of Esquire. They started a civil war to cancel the 13th Amendment. So now,
well, no, that's not why the Civil War was started. The South was seceding, but at that time, the South was the primary economic powerhouse of the entire country. And so Lincoln needed to bring them back on in order to be able to collect tax revenues from them. Because without the Confederacy, the Union would have gone into an economic slump. And, Lincoln had to take...
I do believe, because the 13th Amendment was ratified where it said no title of nobility shall exist, and if they were given one, they would lose their citizenship and be deported.
Yeah, that was the original 13th Amendment.
That was the original 13th Amendment, and then they went and put that one in there where it says, well, no slavery shall exist in the United States except as a punishment of a crime. And then they also, but that's not the issue, though. When they did that, the Federal Reserve bank system was granted a title of nobility. You can't audit the Fed, so you were denied equal protection under the law, because they gave these 47 bankers the opportunity to create the money, print it out of nowhere, and they bought up the country with it. The second the violation they is when they gave the women the right to vote, to cancel their husband's vote.
Wait a minute. I think we're getting into trouble here because, first of all, if you go back to the 2016 elections, remember all the Democrats who were screaming on how too many wives were voting the same way their husband did. And probably that's because, husbands and wives would have discussions about politics, and they would probably arrive at a mutual consensus.
They may have wised up, but this group of people started with Adam Weishaupt, and they said they were going to pit one against the other. They were going to destroy the family, nationality, and religion. And then this formed the Illuminati, the Bilderberger, the Insiders, the Trilateral Commission.
Yeah, Anthony.
And the bottom line, every member of Congress is in treason. Every senator is in treason. The President of the United States is in treason. And the 9 whores on the Supreme Court are in treason. They all must be tried for treason and brought to justice. And everybody that took a loan from the Federal Reserve had no right to collect interest on the income because they not lend gold or silver money. They loan credit. And there was even a law in the federal statute you cannot charge interest on credit. Then they went and broke the law by saying that they could keep military with NATO for more than 2 years, and the Constitution forbids an armed force being allowed to exist after 2 years.
Yeah, Anthony, we know this government. Anthony, I need to calm you down a little bit because you're sort of jumping all over the place with the Illuminati and whatnot. We know that this country is in the mess that it's in because the wonderful experiment in self-government that was created by Thomas Jefferson and the others has over the years been mutated and mangled and basically reformed into something that serves the elite. Anyway, Anthony, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. We got to get back to some news here. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And getting on back to immigration here, some interesting poll numbers, and I hope somebody from the White House is paying attention to this here, because President Trump's base of supporters basically remains on his side. But if the wall is not built, pollsters are saying he faces a 43% drop in support. And basically, there was a new poll of 2,700 Trump voters, and nearly half of them said they would abandon him if he fails to get that wall built. Now, interestingly enough, in the Democratic swing districts, and by that we mean districts that voted for Trump in 2016 but voted Democratic in the last election, most of the people in those districts also backed the wall. I think the American people do back the idea of a wall. It's just being fought by the open borders people and the Democratic Party, who are counting on illegal immigrant voters to put them over the top in 2020, because it almost worked in 2016. Now, Ann Coulter is out there, and sometimes I like her, sometimes I don't. This is a good article. And she's got an article saying, "Hey, Commander, start commanding." And she's out there like everybody else. Has anybody read the Constitution? And where it says, the president shall be the commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into the actual service of the United States. And basically what she's doing is she's saying the Constitution was written to make it very hard for the military to fight wars around the globe. This last caller was mentioning there's actually a provision in there. Our military are not allowed to be outside the country after 2 years. And the Constitution was written to allow our military to do something it never does, which is to defend our own country. So, anyway. Now, over in Europe, Brussels apparently is going to tell Theresa May there will be no help until March. So she's leaving Brussels basically empty-handed after these crunch meetings with the EU's most senior officials trying to break the Brexit impasse. And another Brussels boss just decided it was time to hurl insults. The EU's Brexit coordinator, Guy Verhofstadt, fired further shots at this row between Brussels and Britain today, saying that they would divide heck. And of course, that came hard on the heels of Donald Tusk saying that there was a special place in the dark regions for the Brexiteers. Now, that brought a huge backlash, and there is now tremendous pressure on EU President Donald Tusk to apologize after he said there was a special place in the dark regions for no-plan Brexiteers. Well, they're heading into it. Now, there is a report, which I cannot get a confirmation on, that the British government is planning to delay the Brexit by another 2 months. They're going to call it a grace period. Now, under the EU agreement, under Article 5, March 29th is when it goes. But Britain is, the Remainers are still desperate. They're desperate, so they want to push it back to May 29th. Okay, article out of Breitbart News, authored by Dillingpole, says the EU treated Greece like a whipped slave. Britain deserves better. And he's absolutely right. If you look at how the EU treated Greece, try to deal with its economic woes and just pouring more onto it, urging privatization, that's what it's really all about. And Britain does deserve better. Great Britain deserves to go back to being Great Britain. And these EU member nations need to grow some spine and stand up to the European Union. Now, a lot of them are starting to, because populists and nationalists are sweeping the elections. That, of course, has got Brussels very, very worried. Article over here in the Express talking about a 2003 documentary, The Real Face of the European Union. And it basically features Philip Day, who's a journalist, and he documents about how the politicians who took the European nations into the European Union deliberately conspired to keep the truth about what was being done away from their people. Because the people were told it's going to be free trade and basically free travel, and that's going to be it. But apparently right from the start, the plan was to create a federal European superstate and merge the 25 European nations. Strip away their sovereignty, strip away their rights. And Brussels has come dangerously close to doing that. And they were going to call the country Europe. It would have one parliament, one government, one court of justice, one currency, one flag, and one anthem. That's been the plan all along. So, now over in Germany, apparently a Antifa-linked website has posted an assassination guide directed at populists. This actually calls for the assassination of several major figures in the Populist Alternative for Germany party, including detailed instructions on how to do so. This was on a web platform linked to Antifa's far-left extremists. And the post was made on the infamous Indie Media web platform that's been used by far-left extremists. So under the title, The AFD and the Election Campaign, the post calls on Antifa members to examine the dates of AFD public appearances and study maps of venues to escape once they have finished the assassination. That's real brown shirt stuff. And we're getting to the blood in the streets phase. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Mabel in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Actually, I was listening to the David Knight Show. I just sent you an email.
I got it.
I was listening to the David Knight Show this morning, and he had Gerald Celente on as a guest. And Gerald Celente had predicted that Donald Trump, before anybody really knew about Donald Trump, was going to win the presidency, which he has. Well, he made his prediction this morning, first time on the David Knight Show, that 2020, the Democrats would pick Beto O'Rourke as their candidate, and he cited the fact that Beto would pick up all the youth voters, but he also, and then when he was asked by Harrison Smith, who was filling in for David, he said, well, how do you base this? And he said, I base it on the fact that when nobody ever heard of Barack Obama until he went on the Oprah Winfrey show.
Yes.
And she kind of groomed him, took him under, put him under the wing. And the next thing you know, everybody hears about Barack Obama and he becomes president. He said, well, interestingly enough, she just had Beto O'Rourke on her show. And she had asked him, do you plan on running for president? And he said, oh, I don't know about that. I have to check with my family. And it was brought out that his wife's father is like a multimillionaire. He's extremely wealthy. So I was thinking after I heard that Beto O'Rourke is in El Paso, which is on the border.
Yeah.
So that could pull a lot of votes because we still don't have a secure border in Texas here at all. They just go over the Rio Grande and that's it.
Time to get
some
crocodiles.
All I have to say. I thought it was interesting. And I will let you go.
All right.
Thank you.
It's a long way to 2020. And you're still hearing rumblings that Hillary may try and step back in, although she doesn't seem to have a lot of support within her party. We'll be right back after these few minutes.
Oh, my God.
Aloha America, welcome back to our show. And under the category of political correctness going really wacky, over at the College of St. Rose in Albany, they are giving out breast flattening chest binders to female students who believe they are men. There's no counseling required. These women can come on in and say, I want one, and they get a new one free of charge at the start of every semester. So this transgender thing is it's like a mass psychosis, and I don't understand what the agenda behind it is other than to keep us all disconnected from reality here. All right, another story from Investment Watch blog, why social media are now the real enemies of truth, and they certainly are. And they become a much bigger abuser of the truth than even the corporate media. And of course, that's what's given rise and impetus to the independent media, which in turn has resulted in corporate media and corporate social media trying to fight back and trying to get back to their old business model. They're not doing very well here. All right, let's talk about NewsGuard. This is this web browser plugin. It's from Microsoft. Apparently, it's built into the mobile version of Edge. And I don't know if there's a way to turn it off, but I can't imagine people really be willing to use this thing. But apparently, this NewsGuard, it tags all independent news outlets as unreliable, and all of the established corporate media get the official verified symbols. I mean, that's how overtly biased they are. And apparently, in their latest attempt to economically harm the independent media, they're steering advertisers away from any content that supports President Trump. I mean, that's how bad it's getting. According to Breitbart News, the neoconservative-run NewsGuard now has a built-in blacklist of online publishers that the information police, actually call them the thought police, have deemed as inappropriate for advertisers. Included on this blacklist are both conservative and left-wing websites that aren't controlled by the deep state's Ministry of Propaganda, which I guess probably includes myself and RBN. Story out of Russia Today. Weaponized disinformation. Pentagon craves new influencing tools against enemy propaganda. Well, let's call it what it is. It's a propaganda war. The Pentagon wants to go back to the glory days of the 1950s and 1960s when they could lie to you with impunity and you would believe it and fling your money and your children into whatever proxy war was being fought anywhere in the globe. So the Defense Department is pushing for an escalation of information warfare. and they're saying overtly the concern is our adversaries are influencing our elections. Well, look at that earlier story where the U.S. is influencing elections in Israel. Anyway. Okay, over at Facebook, their troll hunter-in-chief, Nathaniel Gleicher, is apparently tied to a neocon think tank. Anyway, I had to answer something from the control room here. So yeah, the neocons apparently are viewing the global awakening as a serious threat. So are the globalists and the New World Order people. And they want to put us all back to sleep. It's not really going to happen. I mean, you can spend decades, generations, acquiring the trust of a population, and then one lie can destroy it all, and that trust does not come back. In fact, there's an old saying, trust arrives on foot but departs on horseback. It will be generations before anybody in the United States trusts anybody in government or anybody in the corporate media. That's how bad. Okay, apparently we had an off-air caller who wanted me to ask on the air regarding the breast flattening bans for trans students. Who's paying? I said probably it's coming out of other students' tuition. But it's just so silly. And especially for a Catholic institution to lower themselves down to this level of silliness. Apparently, remember 3 years ago, Apple refused to give the federal government access to the devices used by the accused San Bernardino shooters. Well, apparently, they've had a change of heart. The company has given the Office of Special Counsel complete access to Trump advisor Roger Stone's iCloud account. So a little bit of a double standard there. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, this actually made the TV news. The New York Police Department has sent a cease and desist letter to Google demanding that the company stop allowing its customers to report police DWI checkpoints using their GPS apps. And apparently, this was something that combines Google Maps, and the app itself is called Waze, W-A-Z-E. And apparently it allows users to share information about hazards on the road. And apparently a lot of people are using it to report the presence of police checkpoints. So it's another case of, good idea being used for bad reasons, because certainly around here, that would be a nice app to have because of all the road closures and the construction and everything else that's going on here. But apparently some people who had decided to overindulge in alcohol or some such nonsense abused it, and now the NYPD is trying to shut it all down. We'll see how Google responds to that. Okay, we talked about this last week, and it appears to be still going on. There's a scammer who is out there using YouTube's automated copyright system to basically hold YouTube channels ransom. The scammers will submit multiple fake copyright flags on the videos, getting them to within one of having their accounts deactivated. And then they'll contact the YouTube channel owner and demand a ransom, $150 PayPal or $75 Bitcoin. So, and apparently the letter said, once we receive our payment, we'll cancel the strikes on your channel. Well, not good for YouTube here. Now, Google is ducking any responsibility, but apparently there is a problem with the Nest camera system, that apparently it is hackable, and there's been a string of very creepy security incidents. even while it's denying it's to blame, Google sent an email to owners of these security devices telling them to reset their passwords and enable stronger account authentication settings. Apparently last month, users began to report on bizarre cases where hackers appear to take over their Nest security cameras, hurl insults at them, spy on them, and even tell Amazon's Alexa to play Despacito by Justin Bieber. Now, another scam that has just hit the email boxes is the email basically says you've received an electronic fax. And you open the message, and there's a little form there, fax number, blah, 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 originated here, we got it at this time, and then down at the bottom, there's a button to click to preview your fax. That's where the malware comes in. So keep an eye out for that one as well. A lot of scammers out there. A lot of scammers. My goodness here. All right, lately we've been talking about the Sackler family, and they are the family that has grown incredibly rich off of OxyContin deaths. And there's now a lawsuit. And apparently one of the things that came out in the lawsuit was that the heir to the Sackler fortune once said that 59 OxyContin deaths in one state was, quote, not bad, and then urged staff to increase opioid doses in patients to increase profits. Now, of course, having created this crisis, Sackler is going to profit again because they've now patented a drug to treat addiction. I don't see a big difference between this kind of drug peddling and the guy down on the corner. It's exactly the same thing. Get them addicted, make money. This is not what's best for their health. Let's see. Oh, somebody just sent it. Getting on back to that breast flattening thing, and I ought to send this over to that Catholic school here. Research has found that compression of the breast leads to breast cancer because it slows down the lymphatic drainage. Yeah, I remember reading about that a while ago, and there was a caution against wearing bras that were too tight. Okay. Out in California, we were talking about this the other day, something called valley fever, and it is a deadly infection. It is potentially lethal. It's caused by a fungus that is in the soil, let's be honest about it, along that southern border of the United States. And apparently it's on the rise. The cases are soaring. According to the California Department of Public Health, the number of cases in valley fever increased by 11% in 2018 over 2017. So people get this by breathing in the spores found in the air in areas where the fungus is present, which includes parts of Mexico, Central America, and South America. So when you have these immigrant caravans walking across the desert, they're kicking up these spores, which means they may come down with this, which is going to increase costs to treat them when they get inside the United States of America here. Yesterday, we were also talking about this typhus outbreak in Los Angeles. Now, typhus, of course, is carried by the fleas, which are in turn carried by rats. The rats are booming in Los Angeles because of all the trash that's piling up from the homeless, the immigrants, and so forth. But if you think that that's where the typhus outbreak is happening, you would be mistaken, because apparently it's hit City Hall. Last November, Liz Greenwood was diagnosed with typhus. Now, she's a veteran Los Angeles City Hall official and a deputy city attorney that works in City Hall East. And apparently there is a rat problem inside City Hall. So it really is becoming like a third world place. Okay, we also mentioned this earlier, but now we've got some actual numbers here. As we're dealing with this extreme cold weather, we were talking about how Tesla Model S and other electric car owners were noticing the range went down in the cold. And apparently it's by almost half in the current cold snap. almost half. So if you are in the areas where this hard winter is hitting and you drive an electric car, you're going to have to keep an eye on that meter and make sure that the charge is topped off, because you only have about half the range that you think that you do. All right, we're going to take a phone call from James in South Carolina. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I hear everybody talking about, we can't get any traction. We can't get Trump to do what we want him to do and all like that. Is something I've thought about, maybe for the next election, is could we come up some way or another with a series of questions, probably not over 10, and you can give it to each candidate, each representative, senator, president, and try to force them to answer the questions. If they don't answer, you put it in a public place. This man will not answer these questions. It would, and if it could be public, it would seem to me to be a viable thing. What do you think?
Well, what kind of questions would you be thinking of asking?
Well, I guess everybody has their own set, but you have to get together with a lot of people that has similar views to ask those representative questions. I mean, if it was me personally, I'd ask why are we fighting all over the world? I'd ask about the Federal Reserve. I'd ask some basic things. I say, do you believe in the Constitution?
Well,
I would ask things like that. I would ask very basic things having to do with the Republic, what we're doing in the country, and what we're doing in the world. You can't ask too many, because then it would get dissipated and all like that. I would say just a few, no more than 10, maybe not even 10. But I mean, I'm sure there are people that would say they don't like the Constitution anymore. Well, if they would say that publicly, that would be a very good thing.
Well, George W. Bush did say it publicly, or at least on camera. And the only flaw with your plan is that, as has been demonstrated through so many campaigns over the years, the candidates are going to lie. They're going to say what they think you want to hear to get your vote. We got suckered in by both Bushes. We got suckered in by the Clintons. Oh, boy, did we. Then Obama, and now Trump.
Well, then you hold their feet to the fire some way or another with public revulsion of what they have done. They have.
Well, that's
like
kind
this thing about.
It's kind of what we're doing right now here on the show. We're expressing our revulsion that Trump lied about getting us out of these foreign wars, and he lied about pulling troops out of Syria. He's lied about pulling the troops out of Afghanistan, and now he's getting us into a new war in Venezuela. And he lied about really taking a good look at vaccine safety. He dropped the ball on honest elections. The only thing that he is really standing firm on is that border wall, and so far he's being successfully blockaded.
Well, then we should have some kind of public demonstration some way or another about, maybe not pick everything he's doing, but something he's doing, and everybody get behind it. I mean, I don't know what else to do. I'm very frustrated.
I hear that from a lot of people.
Everybody is, but I mean,
I hear that from a lot of people. They're very frustrated that the government just seems oblivious to the interests and needs of the American people. I don't know how many protests there are. I know that there are regularly protests in front of the White House. They rarely get covered, unless it can be used to push, the anti-Trump agenda. I would love to see a live streaming webcam looking at that section of Pennsylvania Avenue right in front of the White House, just so we could peek in every once in a while and see who's demonstrating today.
Well, I think it's things like that. I called in, I don't know, about a year ago, and I said that we ought to have public electronic billboards. I don't know how much they cost or anything, but I do think if you had an electronic billboard and you could counter publicly, I mean, that's an in-your-face kind of thing. I think even stronger for those that see it than the internet, because everybody sees it at one time. And I don't know how to do that, but I know it's being done commercially now.
Yes.
And I think that would be I think it would be very powerful if things like that were done. Trump will not get out of Syria. Put it up there publicly. Everybody can see it. It would cause but I don't know how to fund it or anything like that.
Well, the problem with an electronic billboard is it only covers a very, very small area. We reach a much, much larger audience, here on RBN and whatreallyhappened.com.
I realize that, but if you put it next to CNN or next to Fox or something like that, and you contradict what Fox says, and you contradict it, I think it would have to have an impact. And also, you could put, if you wanted to, you could put the same thing that's being seen on the billboards. You could put it on the internet. But these are just, like I say, I'm frustrated. I don't know what else to do. I don't. I've called my congressman. He's only one congressman. I like him, but he's only one.
Yeah.
We got Lindsey Graham as the senator here, and I don't know what's wrong with Lindsey Graham. He's changed his stripes, and he's except for the wars, he's doing pretty good. It looks like to me it's the greatest conversion since St. Paul. I don't understand about Lindsey Graham, but I don't know what else to do about the whole thing. I mean,
I wonder if Graham is getting ready to step in for 2020. That would be a reason for him to start, changing his persona, if you will.
I don't know. I doubt anybody'd vote for Lindsey Graham. I'm not going to vote for. I don't trust Lindsey Graham, but he is doing better. I'll give him that much. And if he would continue to do the good things, I probably would support him. But I don't. He has a history that's unpalatable. But at any rate, I wish there was something that we could figure out. Maybe I'm wrong in the questions, but there needs to be a grassroots movement of people to change this. It doesn't look like, to me, that the Congress or the Senate is going to do it. And
no, they're not. They're all benefiting from the system as it is right now. They don't want it to change. Wall Street doesn't want it to change. The military-industrial complex doesn't want it to change. The medical-industrial complex doesn't want it to change. And these are huge blocks of political and economic power. And again, I don't advocate violence in the streets or revolution, but to me, it looks like we're heading towards a Soviet Union-style collapse, and we're just going to have to be patient.
Well, there is something that people could do. I mean, this thing about drafting women.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm an old guy. I mean, I'm older than you are, so I'm not going to be drafted. But if all of the young men in the country would refuse to serve if they draft women, and that would be a blow that young men could strike for, the opposite sex. I think the women would appreciate it.
I think just bringing back the draft with or without women in it, that's going to be the wake-up call, because that's what happened during Vietnam. When they brought back the draft, that's when the American people stood up and said, okay, enough. And there were protests all over. And apparently when, I think it was President Johnson, looked out the windows of the Oval Office and saw 1 million people standing on that Central Mall, that's the moment he knew that the war had to be brought to an end. And of course, we know from the Pentagon Papers that they had known way before that that the war could not be won. So it's a very sick situation. Anyway, James,
what I'm proposing, I mean, it could be something else, but like I say, there needs to be some kind of grassroots thing. Maybe my thing's not right, but somebody needs to come up with something. And I think if we get behind something and try it, even if it's wrong, we've attempted. Nothing else is working. Hey, Michael, I'll enjoy your show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and we're coming up here on our last commercial break. So we're talking about how the cold is affecting the batteries in electric cars, and it's almost half the range is being lost. So, when summer comes and temperatures go up, the batteries will come back. But for right now, make sure you keep an eye on that meter and keep the battery charged. As you know, we've had another very hard winter. More about that when we come back from this commercial break. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about human-caused global warming, and one of the things that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did say that struck people as being kind of Sarah Palinish was this claim that Earth will be destroyed in just 12 years unless we deal with this problem here. And I've noticed just over the last couple of weeks that news reports about the winter have disappeared to be replaced once again with climate alarmism propaganda. And they're still out there trying to push this idea that these freezing cold winters are caused by global warming, which is ridiculous because back in 2000, they said global warming meant there'd be no more snow. Snowfalls are a thing of the past. So now they're trying to flip it over and just say, you know, with all this razzle-dazzle and lots of pretty charts, you know, trust us. The Arctic is warming, and that cold Arctic air is coming down here and freezing us. Well, it's silly. It's bad science. It's pseudoscience here. And they're still pushing. They want a carbon tax. And some states are getting ready to pass one. We were talking about that yesterday. And of course, there is still that desire by the globalists to use human-caused global warming to justify control over how we live our lives. So over at the British Met Office, they've come out with a new report saying Earth is headed for the hottest decade ever recorded. And the Met Office is saying temperatures over the next 5 years will be warmer than pre-industrial levels. Well, actually, we're going into a solar decline. Temperatures are down. Even NASA has admitted that the Earth has actually been cooling. Except they still came out with that story the other day about how 2018 was the 4th hottest year on record here. But they're still pushing that propaganda. Still pushing the agenda. It shows how little respect they have for people. They honestly think if they just keep repeating the lies over and over and over again, eventually we're going to believe it. No, we're not. In fact, the more they lie, the more audience they lose, and they've lost a lot of their audience. And the more people, I think, are starting to dig their feet in and say, wait a minute, enough of this nonsense about human-caused global warming, Saddam's nuclear weapons, Assad's poison gas. You know, enough is really enough. All right, for those of you concerned about these large meteors that came down over Russia and more recently Cuba, the European Space Agency's Near-Earth Object Coordination Center keeps finding new near-Earth objects. These are asteroids which are orbiting more or less near the Earth, and their orbits can intersect. And so the European Space Agency is saying that actually they have to sort of increase their estimate of the risk of an asteroid hitting into Earth. That's a bad thing. Okay, there's music. Time for me to get out of here. I got stuff I got to do this afternoon. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure that he's going to have a lot of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you hear here and read at the website. Share those with your friends. Stay skeptical. Think for yourself. It makes the government very, very nervous. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. We'll be back tomorrow with the lovely Lady Claire. Aloha, America.